The submitted manuscript is an expansive, investigative account of the geography, customs, religion, and dynastic history of Egypt, blending firsthand observation with local lore.
Right, and while the foundational detail is just, it's stunning, there is a massive structural hurdle right at the start.
The manuscript's transition from geographical exposition to chronological history lacks a unifying narrative bridge.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Because what really disrupts the reading experience in those early chapters is that, well, that sudden, completely unexplained gear shift.
Mm-hmm.
The author spends an enormous amount of time building this really intricate thematic exploration of the culture and the physical landscape, right?
Right. We get these meticulous breakdowns of the nature of the Nile, like reading about how a sounding line let down a full day's sail from the coast, brings up mud in 11 fathoms of water.
Which is a brilliant detail. It proves the land itself is a gift of the river.
Exactly. And then we dive into animal husbandry. We learn how the people of Thebes, adorn their sacred crocodiles with gold and molten stone earrings.
Oh yeah, and the fen dwellers baking lotus and papyrus for food. It builds a complete, vibrant ecosystem.
You really feel it. You feel the heat of the sun and the moisture of the river. But then,
Yeah, here it comes.
right after establishing this breathing world, we are suddenly just handed a papyrus roll containing the names of 330 kings. And we just start marching through time in a straight line.
It's so jarring. We go straight into King Min, then down the line to Queen Nitocris drowning her enemies in that secret underground chamber, and eventually to Sesostris and his massive military campaigns.
It honestly feels like two completely separate manuscripts spliced together.
Yeah, it does. We lose all that rich environmental context the absolute second the timeline begins.
So, how do we fix that?
Well, a highly effective way to solve this would be to introduce a transitional framework that uses those earlier thematic and geographical elements as the actual foundation for the history.
Okay, making the geography work for the narrative.
Exactly. Instead of just listing what these historical figures did, the author should contextualize their actions as direct responses to the environment.
So, linking the volatile landscape to the human history.
Right. By explicitly doing that, the narrative flow becomes seamless. The chronological history should feel like a logical progression of the geography, not, a departure from it.
I love that. To put that into perspective, the current structure feels a bit like taking a guided museum tour.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, like where the curator spends an entire hour explaining the chemical makeup of the canvas, the binding agents in the oil paint, the humidity of the studio.
All the technical stuff.
Right, and then abruptly they just begin reciting a timeline of the artist's birthdays and death dates.
Without ever explaining how the paint influenced the art.
Exactly. You are left holding all this technical data with absolutely nowhere to apply it.
Building on that museum analogy, think about how the author could take the data about the Nile and apply it directly to the very first historical figure they introduce.
King Min.
Yeah, King Min. When moving from the customs of the priests to Min, there is a massive missed opportunity. The text could explicitly connect how the geographical reality of Egypt necessitated Min's very first major project.
Because we just spent, dozens of pages learning about the unpredictable inundation of the Nile?
Right, how the river constantly overflows and turns the land into a giant, vulnerable floodplain.
Wait, that actually completely recontextualizes Min's first act.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, because when he takes power, his first major architectural feat is the banking of the river at Memphis to protect the city.
Exactly. He diverted the river to flow in the middle between the mountains so that Memphis wouldn't be overwhelmed by the seasonal flood.
Wow. So that isn't just a random king doing a random public works project.
No, not at all. That is a direct, engineered response to the terrifying geography the author just spent 50 pages describing.
Oh, that's so good. By drawing that explicit line, the history actually proves the geography. The author shows us that Memphis exists in defiance of the river.
Right. And look at another moment later in the manuscript, during the Ethiopian invasion led by Sabakochis.
Remind me of that one.
So the blind king, Anisis, he flees and hides in the Fen country on the island of Elbow for 50 years. And he survives by having ashes brought to him secretly, basically building up the elevation of his refuge.
Oh, right. Man, if the narrative actively called back to the earlier geographical analysis of those marshlands, that story would carry so much more weight.
Exactly. Because earlier, the author describes the fens as these incredibly difficult to navigate expanses.
Yeah, where the land is constantly shifting, soaking through with water, swarming with little fishes and pests.
So tying those two sections together makes Ambarissa's survival strategy look brilliant. It becomes deeply rooted in the harsh landscape.
He isn't just hiding in a generic swamp.
Right. He is utilizing an unnavigable, treacherous terrain that the Ethiopian army literally cannot penetrate. The geography provides the necessary context for the history to actually make sense.
It makes the environment an active character in the dynastic struggles, rather than just like a painted backdrop.
Perfectly said.
It's fascinating how integrating the geography actually validates the history. But speaking of validation, there's another area where the author's brilliant deductive logic suddenly vanishes, which leads us to our next point.
Oh, absolutely.
The narrative occasionally blurs the line between rigorous empirical observation and unverified hearsay, which compromises the robustness of the historical claims.
This is perhaps the most fascinating pivot in the author's entire methodology.
It really is.
Because early on, the author acts as a remarkably diligent climatologist and geographer. They apply intense critical logic to physical phenomena.
But
the moment we transition into cultural and historical anecdotes, that rigorous methodology just evaporates.
it's wild. Let's look closely at the section discussing the Nile's flooding to see just how sophisticated that early logic is.
Oh, the three Ionian theories.
Yes. The author masterfully refutes the three major Ionian theories about the river's origins using pure deduction. Like, they dismiss the idea that the northern Edazine winds prevent the Nile from flowing out into the sea.
Right, noting that other rivers face those exact same winds and don't flood.
Exactly. They dismiss the concept of a world encircling ocean stream as pure poetic fiction. And they completely dismantle the theory that the Nile flows from melting snow.
And their argument against the snow theory is ironclad empirical observation.
It is.
They argue that the winds blowing from that southern region are hot, that the native Ethiopians have dark skin by reason of the burning sun, and that kites and swallows remain there year-round.
Right, so they deduce that if there were snow, there would inevitably be frost, and the birds would migrate away from the cold.
That is a highly sophisticated scientific argument for the ancient world.
It really is. But then, and this is where it gets frustrating, that analytical friction completely disappears when the narrative moves into folklore and local legends.
Oh, you mean like Rhampsinitos?
Yes. Tales like Rhampsinitos' headless thief, or the phoenix carrying an egg of myrrh, or the floating island of Chemis. They're all relayed with a totally passive acceptance of whatever the local priests recount.
Yeah, you just write it down.
Right. Like, when detailing the story of the thief, the author describes how he got the king's guards drunk with strategically leaked wineskins, cut off his own brother's head in a trap to avoid identification,
Which is so dramatic.
and even tricked the king's daughter in the stews by handing her a severed arm in the dark. I mean, it reads exactly like a fable.
It really does.
But the author just writes it all down without applying that same piercing scrutiny they used on the weather patterns.
Right, so a very powerful way to elevate this manuscript would be to apply the same analytical rigor and logical weighting used in the geographical sections directly to these cultural and historical anecdotes.
So, treating the myths like the climate theories.
Exactly. The manuscript desperately needs a consistent hierarchy of evidence. The skeptical geographer analyzing the wind and the historical chronicler writing down the king lists need to be the exact same person.
Okay, I can see what you're going for here, but I have to push back gently on the idea of cross-examining every myth.
Okay, go ahead.
Because the author does sometimes explicitly state in the text, I only record what I am told. They seem to be consciously functioning as a conduit for the culture.
Sure, I get that.
So if the priests of Memphis or Heliopolis hand them down an oral tradition, isn't there immense anthropological value in just preserving that story exactly as it was delivered without tearing it apart?
Preserving the oral tradition is incredibly valuable, without question.
Right.
But consider how much stronger the narrative might be if the author didn't just act as a passive stenographer. What if they actively interrogated the hearsay with the same brilliant deductive reasoning they used to deduce that the delta was formed by accumulating silt? Engaging with the myth critically elevates the text from mere transcription to active historical investigation.
Okay, that's fair. Let's explore how they could actually do that without completely stripping the magic out of the text. Take the story of the phoenix.
Okay, perfect example. So the author describes this sacred bird flying from Arabia every 500 years.
Right.
According to the priests, the phoenix hollows out a giant egg of solid myrrh, places its deceased father inside, seals it back up with more myrrh, and flies the entire heavy package to the Temple of the Sun in Egypt.
And currently, the author states a very brief passing disbelief, but moves on almost immediately.
Yes, exactly. Instead, they should actively dissect why the story defies the natural logic established earlier in the text.
Oh, I see. They could apply the same biological grounding they used on the swallows and the kites.
Exactly. Try calculating the aerodynamics and weight capacity required.
Because myrrh is dense.
It's a dense tree resin. A solid egg of myrrh large enough to hold the body of an adult bird would weigh a massive amount.
Right.
So the author could compare that required wingspan and lifting force to the physical realities of other observed birds they've already analyzed, like the ibis or the fox goose.
Oh, that's brilliant. By showing the reader the physical impossibility of the myth, they aren't just calling it a fable, they are proving why it's a fable.
Exactly.
That keeps the reader completely engaged in that active detective mindset. It turns a fairy tale into a fascinating scientific puzzle.
It really does.
Let's look at another moment where that detective mindset is sorely needed. The recounting of the Helen of Troy detour with King Proteus.
Oh, that part is so interesting. So the Egyptian priests claim that Helen of Troy wasn't actually in Troy during the legendary war.
Right.
They tell the author she was detained in Memphis by King Proteus, who scolded Paris for his impious theft, confiscated the stolen treasures, and kept Helen perfectly safe until Menelaus came to Egypt to claim her.
I mean, it's a massive, controversial subversion of the entire Homeric epic. It rewrites one of the foundational stories of antiquity.
It does. And rather than just recording this massive subversion at face value, the author should actively contrast the priests' claims against their own political motivations.
Oh, like asking what Memphis gets out of the story?
Exactly. What does the city of Memphis gain by placing such a legendary Hellenic figure squarely in their own capital?
I mean, they're essentially claiming they held the most famous woman in the world.
Right. And that an Egyptian king was the true moral arbiter of the Trojan War, acting far more nobly than the Greeks or the Trojans.
Wow, yeah.
Interrogating the economic or propagandistic motives of the source adds a brilliant, sophisticated layer of historiographical depth.
That is such a good point. You know, interrogating the motives of those priests in Memphis brings up another interesting tension in the text. The author relies heavily on translating these local stories into something familiar to an outsider. And that creates a significant pacing issue.
Oh, definitely.
The persistent filtering of Egyptian culture through a comparative Hellenic lens occasionally overshadows the unique intrinsic value of the Egyptian historical record.
This brings us to a crucial issue of cultural alignment, because what often derails the momentum of the text is the way the narrative frequently stops dead in its tracks to directly link Egyptian deities, rites, or customs to Greek counterparts.
Yeah, it completely interrupts the immersion.
It really does.
These constant tangents make Egypt feel like a mere prequel to Greek history rather than a standalone sovereign civilization.
Yeah.
Like, we are reading this incredibly atmospheric account of the Festival of Lamps at Sais, where thousands of saucers filled with salt and oil burn through the night.
Such a great visual.
Or the wild boat processions to Bubastis, where the crowds play flutes and castanets, shouting at the villages they pass.
And consuming more wine in one festival than they do the rest of the year combined.
Yes, you are fully transported into the culture. But then the author goes on a lengthy tangent asserting that the names of the gods actually came from the ancient Pelagians of Greece.
Right. Or that Melampus brought the rites of Dionysus and the phallic processions from Egypt over to Hellas.
It immediately pulls you out of the Egyptian context.
It does. A practical way to remedy this is to center the Egyptian perspective first.
Okay, how would that look?
The text should present their traditions, their theology, and their history entirely independently. Then, structurally isolate all of those cross-cultural Hellenic comparisons into dedicated analytical sections later on.
Oh, I see.
Let the reader fully absorb the Egyptian worldview on its own terms before asking them to compare it to anything else.
Is there a risk, though, that removing these comparisons might alienate a reader who relies on those familiar cultural touchstones to understand a deeply foreign land?
How do you mean?
Well, like, if I'm an ancient Mediterranean reader, knowing that Isis equates to Demeter or that Osiris functions like Dionysus might be the only conceptual way I can wrap my head around this complex foreign theology.
That's a valid point.
The Hellenic lens acts as a vital translation tool, right?
It does. The touchstones are definitely valuable for the audience, but we don't need to delete them.
Just move them.
Right. Reorganizing the text preserves the audience's anchor without disrupting the pacing of the Egyptian narrative. The translation tools shouldn't hijack the main story.
Makes sense.
Think about the moment the author interrupts a fascinating account of the Egyptian pantheon and oracle traditions to discuss the oracle at Dodona.
Oh, right. They go into a long aside about two black doves that flew from Thebes to establish prophetic seats in Libya and Helot.
Yeah, pulling that tangent out of the main flow allows the Egyptian oracle traditions to stand firmly on their own merit first.
We get to understand the Egyptian theology without immediately viewing it through a Greek filter.
Exactly. The author should take all of those comparative origins and group them together.
Into like one section?
Yeah. The dating of Heracles to 17,000 years ago, the transmission of geometry to Greece stemming from King Sostras's meticulous land taxation system, the rites of Pan.
Right, all of that.
All of these moments of cultural transmission could be gathered into a concluding chapter specifically focused on Egypt's influence abroad.
Structuring it that way is brilliant. It allows the primary chapters to breathe and exist entirely within the Egyptian worldview. Then that comparative chapter acts as a powerful synthesis of cultural exchange at the very end of the manuscript.
Exactly. It shows profound respect for both cultures. You get the deep, uninterrupted immersion into the Egyptian state, and you still deliver that crucial comparative analysis the audience craves.
Without blending them into a confusing stop-and-start narrative soup.
Precisely.
Well, this has been an incredibly revealing look at a manuscript that is, without a doubt, a masterpiece of detail, observation, and historical curiosity.
Oh, absolutely.
To briefly synthesize our critique today, the material can be elevated even further by implementing three major structural and methodological adjustments.
Right.
First, create unified narrative bridges that show how Egypt's volatile physical environment, like the unpredictable flooding of the Nile and the shifting marshlands, directly drove its historical and political events.
Explicitly linking the geography to the timeline will definitely smooth out the jarring transition between the thematic chapters and the king lists.
Yes. Second, interrogate the local priest's historical anecdotes with the exact same empirical deductive logic used to analyze the physical world.
Bring the scientific skepticism applied to the Ionian climate theories directly to the tales of the phoenix's myrrh egg and the political motivations behind King Proteus holding Helen of Troy.
Exactly. And third, move the Hellenic comparative tangents, like the origins of the Greek gods and the transmission of geometry, into their own dedicated synthesis section.
That preserves the deep immersion of the Egyptian narrative, while still providing those valuable cultural touchstones in a way that doesn't derail the pacing.
Spot on.
We would absolutely love to see how these adjustments transform the piece. Bringing those elements into harmony will make an already incredible text truly unforgettable.
We warmly invite the listener to implement these structural and methodological suggestions and submit your revised manuscript back to the critique for further constructive feedback.
Yes, please do.
Getting another set of eyes on your work is the absolute best way to uncover its full potential. You know, stepping back to that razor-sharp line between the lush Nile floodplain and the barren desert we discussed at the start.
Well, by weaving these geographical realities directly into the history, treating every local myth with rigorous scrutiny, and letting the culture stand entirely on its own, the author can actually blur that harsh line.
That's beautifully said.
They can create a rich narrative landscape where the environment, the culture, and the history all flow together just as powerfully and inevitably as the Nile itself.